This week, we talk about the difference between using color as a graphic element or as the subject in your photograph. Welcome to the Candid Frame. Hi, everybody. This is Ibarionex from the Candid Frame. Now, most of the images that we shoot are in color if you're using digital cameras, and then later we convert them to black and white, either in camera or more than likely on your computer using whatever software that you prefer. But just because we automatically take pictures in color doesn't mean we're necessarily taking into consideration how much of a role color is playing in the photographs. And to my way of thinking, color plays a variety of different roles, but you can usually break it up into two simple concepts. One, the color is the subject of the photograph, or secondly, you're using color as a graphic element. It's not the only graphic element in the shot that makes the shot. If you're using the former, if color is the subject of your shot, strip the color away from the composition and the image just falls apart because you are so relying on color to give your photograph impact that you're not considering line and shape and gesture and contrast in order to build your composition. However, when you are conscious of color, but also with the lines and the shapes, the contrast between light and dark tones, and especially the gesture, then if you strip away the color, the bones of your photograph are still there, and it can still be an effective photograph. It may benefit to a great deal from color, but it isn't relying on color as the sole element to make the photograph. And I've chosen 3 images so we can explore this concept a little further. Here we have a shot by Ye Min. This was created with a Fujifilm X-T2 at 1/500th of a second, 5.6, ISO 1600. Now, as a color image, this image is quite striking because of the repetition of red throughout the frame. We have the umbrella on the right-hand side, we have the chairs, the tables, the wall, and we have the outfit that this worker here is wearing, his jacket and even the knit cap that he wears underneath his hood. You can see that color here is a really important part of the shot, and I can see why Ye Min was drawn into this scene because that repetition of color is really, really strong. But when you strip away the color, what do you have? Suddenly the composition isn't experienced in exactly the same way because the color, that red, is stripped away. So now we're looking at this scene in very different ways. One of the obvious points of contrast now is the tone in which the red is rendered now creates a contrast between this and the black wall. You see it here with the umbrella, you see it here with the wall, you see it here with the glove, and even with his hand here. That difference in tone makes this image more of a contrast between something that's very dark and something that's a lighter tone. You can especially see it here on the stand and how the brightness of this compares to the darkness of the area behind it. But you can really see it here on his face. And you can see how the red and the black here creates this nice contrast along with the tone of his skin. And note how the skin tone, now that it's measured in levels of gray, compares to all the surrounding elements in here. And you can see that this contrast between the red here is mirrored here, and really like this. So for me, I really favor the color image, but you can see here that the image doesn't completely fall apart simply because the color's gone. Now you can see how the repetition of lines here, the repetition of shapes, even like the white stripes against here, become that much more prominent. And now these lines on his sleeve mirror the stripes here on this chair. And if he had backed up, we would have seen it similarly here. You can see that even though the light is fairly flat, we're not dealing with high contrast light, that line and shape become really, very important. And gesture here is even more pronounced. The gesture of him adjusting the glove on his hand, and also just the way he's tilting his head to the left in order to see that, his he's looking to his left. He may or may not be aware of the presence of the photographer at that moment. But I love that gesture of him looking to the left rather than looking directly at the camera. Okay, here we have a shot by Christian Ferrer. This was created with a Sony A7S at 320th of a second at f11 ISO 1000. So here we have a guy who's just resting at the beach. It's a scene that we've all seen many, many times. And here you can see how the color is playing a big role in the shot. That red shirt really pops out, especially against the sand, that sort of yellow colored sand, and the contrast that's created by the light color of his pants and his black belt. And then the other color that plays a big role here are these poles that repeat throughout the frame. These blue poles that are mirrored even here with this sort of band or whatever this thing that is securing all these beach chairs on the left. So you can see that the red and the blues are really sort of important to this shot. But let's again strip away the color, and what do we see here? We still see the fellow here laying on the sand, but now that color isn't as much of a visual draw as it was before. We still see his shape relatively well defined in the sand, but now take a look at how you are experiencing the images very differently. You can see that these shapes, the shapes of these chairs, the umbrellas in the background, even the texture of the sand itself become that much more important to the shot. The stripping away of the color de-emphasizes the very thing that likely may have drawn Christian to the scene. I mean, it's an interesting scene with this guy sitting there on the beach, but you can see that the color was likely a really big influence that inspired Christian to recognize the potential of the scene and make the photograph. But is this shot just as effective as a black and white as it is a color? To my thinking, I just favor the color because the red sort of anchors me into the image. It gives me a point of focus. And later on, I start exploring the rest of the scene. In the black and white version, I still look at him because he's such a dominant element in the frame, but I find myself wandering a little more around the frame and not quickly as returning to the subject. And the fellow here, he is the main focus of the shot. Granted, he's a human figure. I mean, we might look at him anyway, whether it's a color or a black and white image, but you can see how color, especially very saturated colors, pull your eye like a magnet to a certain area of the frame. And that's something to take advantage when you're seeing any sort of scene, considering how color is playing a role in how you experience that particular composition. If that red was possessed by some element in the background, say this guy in the back was wearing a bright red outfit and this guy was just wearing something that was very similar to this color, that red would pull our eyes up into the upper right-hand corner and would then compete with the subject for our attention. So when you're looking at a composition, it's important to not only consider the colors of your subject and how that helps you to build a composition, but also be aware of secondary elements in the background that may possess very saturated colors that may be a distraction. And sometimes that may be reason enough to convert it over to a black and white in order to eliminate that distraction. But you need to have composed the image, making considerations for all these other things, line and shape and gesture especially. Next, we have a shot by Eric Castro. We have no EXIF data here. So here we have a really interesting shot of these bears seated at a restaurant and with this guy in a red vest in the background. I assume that he works at a restaurant. And immediately you're just drawn into sort of the humor of the scene of these bears looking as if they're waiting for a waiter to take their order. But look at the role that the color plays in this shot. The color of the bears is mirrored in the vest and the tie of the guy in the upper left-hand corner. It's also mirrored in the display here with these hearts. You can see the reds in the flowers here and how that repetition of color is really key here, right? And you got some great color contrast happening between the color of the bears and the white tablecloth. So you can see color is a big anchor here. As amusing as the overall scene is, it's really about the color that it's making this thing pop and leap out at you. But then take away the color. And now we're experiencing this scene very, very differently. Now the weight of the image is on the very bears themselves, not so much the color possessed by the bears, but more about the contrast that's created by these stuffed bears at this table and the guy in the upper left-hand corner. He was still playing a role. There was still an interplay between the two figures. But now, since we're not dealing with color, we're dealing more with the relationship this man may or may not have with the bears that are on the seat. And now whatever contrast that we are seeing is possessed by the bears themselves, the black of their eyes and their noses, in contrast with the fur of their outfit, and also to some degree, again, with the contrast with the tablecloth and this area behind it. Now the lines and shapes are also really important because the noses and the eyes are, again, a repeating pattern within the scene. And that darkness of the nose sort of is mirrored here in the contrast between the red of his vest and the black jacket, which is now rendered in tones of gray. And you may even notice, slight separation here on the centerpiece that you may not have really come to your attention when this was a color image, but as a black and white, you may notice that fact that repetition and pattern of hearts is mirrored here in the hearts, because when you don't have the color, you experience the shot in a very, very different way. And one of the things that you want to do anytime you're composing a shot where color is such a draw, you want to think about, okay, how well can I compose this shot so that I am using whatever contrast exists between light and dark, or even tones of gray. And as you play around with this and you convert some of your images that are really strong in color to black and white, take a look at how the relationships between all the different elements in the frame change really dramatically. If you want to contribute to the Candid Frame Flickr poll, all you have to do is, using your computer, go to Flickr and do a search on the Candid Frame, and then just ask to be added. I usually get to the queue once a week, but avoid doing this on your tablet or phone, because if you do it that way, you'll get a message telling you that it is a private group and it's by invitation only. I've not been able to resolve that issue, so if you just go to your computer, I'll be glad to add you, and you can be part of a community here with the Candid Frame on Flickr. All right, thanks for joining me again. If you want to find out more about the Candid Frame and what we do, the Candid Frame is a podcast in which I feature conversations with photographers from all over the world, from various genres, not just street photography. I recently interviewed Thomas Alleman. He is a street photographer, but he's also had a career as an editorial and commercial photographer, as a photojournalist, and documentary photographer. I had a lot of fun interviewing him for the show, and he was one of the first guests that I've had here in the new studio. And so I think the sound quality is remarkable now, and I'm going to have a lot more guests coming through here as they come through the LA area, so to look forward to that. And if you like what you're seeing here on these videos, give us a thumbs up and or a like or whatever it is. Subscribe, and I'll see you next time.